Poor black girl tells billionaire, I can heal your blind twin boys, he laughs, but this happened. The Reeves mansion sat on a quiet hill outside Vancouver, surrounded by tall pines and the soft hum of the river that ran behind it. It was the kind of place that looked perfect, the kind of home people saw in magazines and said, that man must have everything. And in many ways he did. Mr. Callum Reeves was one of North America's most admired billionaires, a tech genius who had built his empire from a tiny garage startup into a global company worth billions. His name was on the covers of magazines, his words quoted in business schools, and his foundation known for helping children in need. People loved him for his brilliance and generosity. But what most people didn't know was that his true joy, his real reason for smiling every morning, wasn't his success, his fame, or his money. It was his twin boys, Eli and Evan Reeves. Both 12 years old, they were his sunshine after every storm. Eli was the quiet one, thoughtful and curious, always asking how things worked. Evan, on the other hand, was the spark, playful, fearless, and full of mischief. Together, they brought life into every corner of the mansion. Their laughter often echoed down the marble halls, filling the air with warmth money could never buy. To the world, Callum Reeves was a symbol of success, but to those boys, he was simply Dad. It was early autumn, that golden time of the year when the leaves turned fiery orange and the air smelled of pine and rain. Callum had promised his twins a family getaway to the mountains before school resumed. It was supposed to be just 3 days, a short break from business meetings and city noise, a time to reconnect, breathe, and laugh. Dad, don't forget the marshmallows, Evan had shouted while loading the car. Eli, more organized, double-checked the camping gear and reminded his dad to pack the camera. Callum smiled as he watched them. For once, he wasn't the billionaire CEO, he was just a father, proud, content, and ready to make memories. The drive up the mountains was smooth at first. The winding roads were lined with trees swaying in the crisp air. Music played softly in the background and laughter filled the car. Eli pointed at a hawk gliding high above and Evan teased him for being a nature nerd. Then everything changed in the blink of an eye. They were halfway up the mountain road when Callum felt it, the steering wheel suddenly stiffened. A strange grinding sound followed. Dad, Eli said, sensing something was wrong. Callum tried to slow down, but his foot sank into the brake pedal. Nothing happened. His heart pounded. The car kept rolling, faster, downhill. Hold on, he shouted, gripping the wheel as panic surged through his chest. The mountain wind roared past them. The boys screamed, the world spun. The car veered sharply, skidded across the wet road, and before Callum could react, everything went white. The sound of crunching metal, shattering glass, then silence. When Callum opened his eyes, the world was blurred and buzzing with the sound of machines. His head throbbed, his arm was bandaged, but he didn't care about any of that. Where my boys?" he croaked. The nurse hesitated, her eyes flickered with sympathy. "They're alive," she said softly, "but Mr. Reeves, there's something you should know." Callum's world stopped moving when the doctor explained. The accident had caused severe trauma to the twins' eyes. The doctors tried everything, surgeries, therapies, specialists flown in from around the world, but the damage was irreversible. Eli and Evan Reeves were blind. When he first saw his sons again, Callum tried to stay strong. He smiled, pretending everything would be okay, but inside he was falling apart. Eli sat quietly on his hospital bed, his eyes wrapped in bandages. Evan reached out blindly, whispering, "Dad, is it morning yet?" Callum's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. He just held their hands and promised them, "You'll see again, boys, I swear I'll fix this." But deep down, he didn't know if he could. For weeks, he spent millions searching for cures. He flew in specialists from Japan, Germany, and Switzerland. He donated to vision research centers. He even tried experimental treatments that most people hadn't heard of. But nothing worked. Every doctor said the same thing: "We're sorry, Mr. Reeves, there's nothing more we can do." Months passed, the laughter that once filled the Reeves mansion disappeared. The twins, who used to race down the hallways on skateboards, now sat quietly in their room, listening to audiobooks. Eli tried to stay strong for his brother, but Evan had changed completely. He no longer talked much. He just sat near the window, tracing his fingers against the cold glass, imagining what the world looked like. Callum watched them every night from the doorway. He wanted to say something, anything, but guilt chained his voice. If only he had serviced the car earlier, if only he hadn't taken that road, if only. Money could buy almost everything except peace of mind. In public, Callum still looked like the man who had it all together. He attended charity events, appeared on TV interviews, and gave speeches about resilience. People called him an inspiration. But when the cameras went off, he would return home to silence, the kind that screamed louder than words. He couldn't sleep. Night after night, he'd walk into the twins' room and watch them sleep, whispering apologies they could never hear. Sometimes he sat alone in his office, staring at the family photos on his desk, the ones taken before the accident. Eli and Evan smiling with ice cream all over their faces. Evan pretending to wear his father's glasses. Eli holding a toy robot he built with his dad. Callum would trace their faces with trembling fingers and whisper, "I failed you." 6 months after the accident, it was the twins' birthday. Callum wanted to make it special just like before. He invited a few close family friends, decorated the living room with balloons, and ordered their favorite chocolate cake. But when it was time to blow the candles, something happened that shattered him. Evan asked softly, "Dad, are the candles lit?" Callum's hand froze on the lighter. He looked at his son, those beautiful blue eyes that no longer saw light. "Yes," he whispered, "they're lit." Evan smiled sadly. "Then tell us when it's glowing bright, okay?" Callum's voice cracked as he said, "It's glowing, son, make your wish." As the boys leaned forward and blew the candles, tears streamed down Callum's face. No one in the room said a word. The pain was too heavy to touch. That night he went to bed and cried, the kind of cry that shakes a man's soul. Life slowly went on. The media stopped talking about the accident. The world found new stories, new headlines, but for Callum Reeves, time stood still. He stopped going to work regularly. His assistants handled the company while he stayed home with his boys. He hired music teachers, therapists, and psychologists to help them adapt, but nothing could bring back their spark. Sometimes Eli would try to comfort his father. "Dad, we're okay, we can still hear, feel, and laugh." But Evan, sitting silently beside him, would add, "It's not the same, Eli. I want to see Dad's face again. I want to see the sky." Every time Evan said that, Callum would turn away, unable to hold his tears. One cold night, unable to sleep, Callum stood by the window, staring into the dark forest outside. The moonlight cast long shadows across the room. He whispered, "I don't care what it takes. I'll spend every dollar, travel every mile, but I'll find a way to make them see again." It was a promise not to the world but to himself. But little did he know, the answer to his son's healing would not come from science, money, or medicine. It would come from the most unexpected place, a poor little black girl, the same age as his twins, who would walk into his life with a gift beyond explanation. And when she told him, "I can heal your blind twin boys," he would laugh, not out of mockery but out of disbelief. Because by then, he had already lost faith in miracles. But miracles were about to find him. The world saw Callum Reeves as a man who could do anything. He built billion-dollar companies from scratch, turned broken systems into gold, and was once named the genius who solves the impossible. But there was one thing he couldn't solve, the darkness that had taken his twin boys. The accident had left scars on everyone, but for Callum, the greatest wound was invisible. It was the helplessness, that gnawing pain of watching his children live in a world without light. Every morning, he'd wake up to the soft sound of their footsteps in the hall. He'd listen to them feeling their way around the house, Eli counting his steps, Evan holding onto the wall. It tore him apart. So he made a decision. He wouldn't stop until they saw again. He called in every favor, every connection he had. Within weeks, he was flying across the globe, chasing hope in every corner of the earth. His first stop was Zurich, Switzerland, home to one of the world's top ophthalmology institutes. The snowy Alps glistened outside the clinic's glass windows as Callum sat across from a gray-haired surgeon named Dr. Heller, a man known for restoring vision through complex stem cell surgeries. "I've read your son's reports," Dr. Heller said, adjusting his glasses. "Their case is severe but not hopeless. We'll try everything." Those words were enough for Callum. He paid the advance immediately, $500,000. the twins were prepped for surgery the next day. Callum waited for hours in the hospital corridor, packing, praying, hopping. When Dr. Heller finally walked out, Callum stood up quickly. "How did it go?" The doctor sighed, removing his gloves. "We did everything we could, but I'm afraid their optic nerves are completely damaged. Surgery can't fix what's already gone." Callum froze, his heart sank. He had come with faith and was leaving with another wound. But he didn't stop. 2 months later, he was in Tokyo, Japan, where a leading medical team was experimenting with robotic eye reconstruction. The hospital looked more like a futuristic lab filled with holographic screens and digital models of the human eye. A young scientist named Dr. Akira Watanabe greeted him warmly. "Mr. Reeves," he said in perfect English, "we've read about your story. We're developing nanotech lenses that could possibly restore limited sight. It's still experimental, but if you're willing to take the risk." Callum didn't even let him finish. "I'll pay whatever it costs." Weeks passed in Japan as the twins underwent multiple tests and scans. They were brave, too brave for their age. Evan would often whisper to his brother, "Maybe this is the one, Eli. Maybe we'll see Dad's face again." Callum heard him one night and had to step outside to cry. But after all the procedures, the results came in. No change. Dr. Watanabe bowed deeply, eyes full of sorrow. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves, the human eye is complex and sometimes even science has its limits." That night, as Callum looked out over the glowing skyline of Tokyo, he realized something that frightened him. Maybe hope was beginning to hurt more than failure. Over the next 2 years, the Reeves family became a symbol of resilience. Newspapers wrote headlines like, "Billionaire father fights to cure his son's blindness." He was invited to conferences, asked to speak about never giving up, but none of it mattered to him. Every trip, every surgery, every dollar, it all ended the same way: disappointment. From Berlin to Dubai, India to Singapore, Israel to the United States, he knocked on every door. He met scientists who injected stem cells, surgeons who tried corneal implants, and neurologists who promised to rebuild visual pathways. Each time, Callum paid whatever it took, sometimes millions. He didn't care. But nothing worked. Back home, life began to feel different. Eli and Evan had always been close, but blindness slowly built a wall between them and the world. Eli adapted faster. He learned Braille, listened to audiobooks, and found comfort in music. He tried to stay hopeful for his father's sake. But Evan changed. He was the one who used to climb trees, race his brother on bikes, and play soccer until sunset. Now he sat in silence most days, his face turned away from the light he could no longer see. "I hate this," he whispered one afternoon, his voice trembling. "I hate not seeing you, Eli. I hate that Dad keeps trying to fix us." Eli reached for his hand. "He's trying because he loves us." Evan pulled away. "Then why does it hurt so much to be loved like this?" Callum overheard that conversation from the hallway. It hit him harder than any failed surgery ever could. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The Reeves' fortune began to thin, not enough to make headlines, but enough for Callum to notice. He had spent close to $40 million on medical travels, surgeries, and donations to vision research. His assistants advised him to stop, but he couldn't. "Money is useless if it can't buy my son's happiness," he told them. But deep down, he knew money was beginning to lose its meaning. The more he tried to buy a cure, the more he felt like he was buying disappointment. One night, Callum sat alone in the twins' darkened room. The moonlight spilled faintly across their sleeping faces. He thought about the nights he used to tell them bedtime stories about heroes who never gave up. Now he wondered if he had become the villain in their story, the man who kept dragging them through pain disguised as hope. He whispered, "Maybe I should stop." But then, as if in reply, Eli stirred in his sleep and murmured, "Don't stop, Dad, you always fix everything." Callum's heart clenched. He kissed their foreheads and whispered, "Then I'll keep trying until my last breath." A few days later, something changed. It was a sunny afternoon, one of those rare days when the world felt gentle again. Callum decided to take the twins out for fresh air. Not to another clinic, not to a hospital, just somewhere normal. He drove them to a local school playground. the same one near their old neighborhood. The air was filled with the laughter of children, the sound of shoes squeaking on swings, the metallic creak of seesaws, the chirping of birds in the trees above. Callum guided them to a long blue bench under shade. "Listen," he said softly, "you hear that?" Eli smiled faintly, "Kids playing." Evan turned his face toward the sound. For the first time in months, he smiled too, just a little. "It sounds happy." They sat there in silence for a while, soaking in the moment. A little boy ran past, laughing. A girl's voice called out to him, "Tag, you're it." Eli chuckled, "I remember playing that." Callum nodded, "You both were impossible to catch." For a brief moment, it almost felt like life had paused, giving them a tiny piece of peace. But deep down, Callum knew something was missing. The boys were listening to life but not living it. As they sat there, Evan suddenly asked, "Dad, why do you keep trying?" Callum looked at him, confused. "What do you mean, son?" Evan tilted his head. "You keep taking us to all those places, meeting all those doctors, but we're still the same. Maybe we're just meant to be like this." Callum's chest tightened. "No, Evan, don't say that, there's always a way." Eli reached for his brother's hand. "He's right, Dad, you've done enough, maybe it's time to just be." The word struck him like a knife. Be. He didn't even know what that meant anymore. For 12 years, his world revolved around giving them everything. Now, all they wanted was peace. He forced a smile and said, "Okay, then let's just be for today." The three of them sat quietly, listening to the sound of children laughing, a sound that once belonged to their own lives. The twins leaned against their father's shoulders. Callum closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the sun touch their faces. And for a moment there was stillness. But what Callum didn't know was that this simple visit to a playground, this ordinary afternoon, would change everything. Because sitting just a few yards away by the school fence was a poor little black girl with an old backpack and tired eyes. She watched the billionaire and his blind twin boys from afar, curiosity flickering in her gaze. And soon their paths would cross. A meeting that would shake Callum's beliefs, test his pride, and challenge everything he thought he knew about miracles. But that was the beginning of something extraordinary. The golden sun sank low over the playground, painting everything in warm shades of orange and red. Children's laughter still filled the air, bouncing off swings, slides, and monkey bars. Parents watched fondly from benches, sipping coffee and chatting about everyday life. But one corner of the playground stood quiet, a small patch of shade beneath a maple tree. That's where Callum Reeves, the billionaire tech genius the world adored, sat with his two blind sons, Eli and Evan. They were like a photograph frozen in time. The boys sat close to their father, listening to the world they could no longer see. Eli's hand traced patterns on the bench while Evan rested his head on his dad's shoulder, silent, distant, lost in thought. To the other parents around, they were just a quiet family. But if anyone looked close enough, they'd see a pain deeper than words could describe, a father who had everything money could buy except the light in his children's eyes. Just across the playground, a young girl stood near the fence with a small wooden tray tied around her neck. Inside were colorful handmade bracelets, woven from threads of red, yellow, and blue. She wasn't playing like the other kids, she was working. Her name was Amira Daniels, and she was 12 years old, the same age as Eli and Evan. Amira came to that playground every afternoon after school, not to play but to sell. Her bracelets were small, simple, but each one carried care and patience, the kind only hunger and love could teach. She made them at night beside her mother, who sat on a squeaky chair near the window of their tiny apartment, coughing softly as she sewed clothes for neighbors. Life had not been kind to Amira. Her father had passed away when she was just 7, a factory accident that left her mother widowed and sick. Since then, Amira had learned to be strong, to smile even when her stomach growled, to work when other kids rested. But she had something rare, a gentle confidence and a kind heart that saw beyond wealth or pain. That afternoon, as Amira made her usual round, trying to convince parents to buy her bracelets, $1 each, "Ma'am, they bring good luck," she noticed something different. Across the playground, she saw the billionaire and his boys. They weren't laughing, they weren't smiling. They just sat there silent, like 3 broken pieces trying to hold each other together. Something about them drew her in. She had seen sadness before in hungry faces in her mother's eyes, but this was different. There was something heavy about the man's gaze, something deep and lonely even though he was dressed in a fine suit and expensive shoes. And the boys, she noticed they didn't look around like other kids. Their eyes moved, but not with purpose. They weren't seeing anything. Then it clicked. They're blind. Amira's fingers froze around a blue bracelet. Her heart softened. She didn't know why, but something inside her said, go talk to them. She hesitated at first. After all, what could a poor girl like her possibly say to a man like that? He looked powerful, serious, the kind of person who lived in a world she could never step into. But there was also something else, a quiet voice that spoke within her heart. A voice that said, you can help them. Amira blinked. Help them, she whispered to herself. It wasn't the first time she'd heard that inner voice. Ever since she was little, she had this strange sensitivity, a feeling that she could sense pain and sometimes make people feel better with her touch. It had happened before when a neighbor's baby stopped crying after she held its hand, or when her mother's chest pain eased after Amira pressed her small palm over her heart and prayed. Her mother used to call it a gift. Amira just thought of it as love that worked in mysterious ways. And now, looking at those sad faces under the maple tree, that same warmth filled her chest again. She took a deep breath, adjusted her tray, and started walking toward them. Her slippers scuffed against the gravel, her heart pounded. The closer she got, the more out of place she felt. Callum's silver wristwatch gleamed in the sunlight. It alone probably cost more than everything she and her mother owned. But she didn't stop. When she reached the bench, she paused and smiled softly. Good afternoon, sir, she said. Her voice was small but steady. Callum looked up, surprised. He wasn't used to being approached without hesitation, especially not by a child selling trinkets. Hello, he said kindly, though his tone carried fatigue. Are you selling something? Amira nodded. Yes, sir, bracelets $1 each. She lifted her tray slightly. They're for good luck. Eli tilted his head toward her voice. They sound nice, he said softly. They are, Amira replied, smiling. Each color means something, blue for peace, yellow for courage, red for love. Evan didn't say anything, he just sat still, his expression unreadable. Callum reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills and said, I'll take 2. He didn't even look at the tray, he just wanted to help the girl and end the moment quickly. But Amira didn't move. She looked at the boys, then back at him, her eyes thoughtful. Finally, she said something that made him freeze. Sir, I can help your boys see again. For a few seconds, there was only silence. The laughter of the playground faded in Callum's ears. He blinked, unsure if he heard right. Eli turned his head toward her voice. What did you say? Amira swallowed nervously but didn't back down. I said, I can help your boys see again. Callum's expression changed, first confusion, then disbelief. Then came the kind of laugh that wasn't really a laugh, the soft, broken sound of a man who had run out of hope. He chuckled and shook his head. You're a sweet kid, he said gently, but you don't understand, they're blind, permanently blind. Amira nodded slowly. I know, sir. Then why would you say that? He asked, trying not to sound harsh. Because it's true, she said simply. Her tone was calm, steady, too steady for a child. I can help them see again. Callum sighed, rubbing his temple. Listen, sweetheart, I appreciate your kindness, but this isn't something a bracelet or wish can fix. I'm not talking about bracelets, Amira replied quietly. That made him look at her, really look. For the first time, he noticed her eyes. They were dark, but not ordinary. There was something deep and bright in them, like a calm light that didn't belong to the world. She didn't fidget or look away. She just stood there, confident yet humble. Eli whispered, Dad, maybe she means something else. Callum gave a faint smile. Eli, she's just a kid. Amira didn't flinch. I know I'm a kid, but I know what I can do. I've helped people before. That sentence caught him off guard. He studied her again, her simple clothes, her thin wrists, the cracked sandals on her feet. She didn't look like someone who could help anyone, but her voice carried a conviction that made him hesitate. Sir, Amira continued softly, I don't have much. I don't have doctors or machines or big hospitals, but sometimes healing doesn't come from those things. Her words made something stir inside Callum, something he hadn't felt in years. She looked at the twins and said, "I can feel their sadness, it's heavy like a fog, but there's still light inside them, it's just trapped." Callum blinked slowly, staring at her. "How do you even know that?" Amira touched her chest gently, "Because I can feel it here." Her innocence was disarming, her confidence unsettling. Evan finally spoke for the first time. "Are you saying you can make us see again?" Amira nodded. "Yes." Evan frowned. "How?" Amira hesitated. "I don't know how to explain it, but I've done it before, not like this, but I've helped sick people feel better. I just pray and touch and sometimes something happens." Callum couldn't help but smile sadly. "You sound like an angel." Amira tilted her head. "Maybe I'm just someone who believes too much." For a long moment, no one said anything. The wind rustled the leaves above, a child laughed in the distance, a bird flew across the sunset sky. Callum looked at his sons, then at the little girl standing before them, poor, barefoot, trembling slightly, yet standing with a confidence that could shake mountains. He felt torn between disbelief and curiosity. Something about her voice, it reminded him of the way Eli used to sound when he still believed anything was possible. Finally, he said, "All right, Amira, right? Tell me something, why would you want to help us?" Amira looked down for a moment, then lifted her eyes again. "Because I know what it feels like to live in darkness," she said softly. "Not this kind," she pointed gently toward the twins, "but the kind that makes you feel small, forgotten." Her voice trembled slightly as she added, "Sometimes helping others see helps me see too." Eli smiled faintly. "I like her," he whispered to his dad. Callum sighed, unsure of what to say. "You're kind, Amira, really kind, but this is beyond what anyone can fix." Amira didn't argue, she just nodded and said, "Maybe, but could you come here again tomorrow? Just let me try once." Her request was simple, but it lingered in Callum's mind long after she walked away. He watched her leave, the little girl with a tray of bracelets, disappearing down the road as the sunset faded behind her. Something about her words wouldn't leave his head. "I can help your boys see again." He told himself it was nonsense, a child's fantasy. But as he looked at Eli and Evan sitting quietly beside him for the first time in years, a strange spark of something he thought he had buried, began to flicker inside him again. Hope. The next day came like any other, golden sunlight spilling through the glass walls of the Reeves mansion, the distant hum of sprinklers on the garden lawn, the quiet rhythm of footsteps echoing in the hallways. But for Callum Reeves, it didn't feel like just another day. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the little girl with the cracked sandals and calm, fearless eyes. Amira Daniels. He had met presidents, pioneers, and Nobel-winning scientists, but none of them had ever looked at him the way she did, with simple, unshakable faith. It unsettled him. It inspired him. It scared him. All morning, he wrestled with himself. Logic said forget it, she was just a poor child selling bracelets. But another part of him, the one that used to believe in impossible things, whispered, what if she's right? By noon, Callum found himself standing beside the twins' door, hesitating. Eli was sitting on the floor, playing a melody on his small keyboard, a tune that always reminded Callum of sunlight breaking through clouds. Evan sat nearby, quiet as always, his hands resting on his lap. Boys, Callum said softly, stepping inside, how about a drive? Eli perked up, where to? Callum hesitated, then smiled faintly, the playground. Evan turned his head toward his father's voice. Again, he asked, sounding both curious and tired. Yeah, Callum said, there's someone I think we should see again. The playground looked different that day, or maybe it just felt different. The air was calm, the children's laughter lighter, the clouds drifting lazily across a sky too blue to ignore. Amira was already there. She stood beneath the same maple tree, her tray of bracelets hanging loosely around her neck. Her face lit up when she saw them approaching. You came, she said softly. Callum nodded, his tone careful. Yes, we came. Eli smiled faintly. Hi, Amira. Hi, Eli, she said warmly. Hi, Evan. Evan didn't speak, but he nodded politely. Callum crossed his arms, glancing around. All right, he said. We're here. You said you wanted to try something. What exactly do you plan to do? Amira didn't answer right away. She looked at the boys, then at the bench they had sat on the day before. Can we sit there again? They moved quietly toward the blue bench. The sunlight filtered through the maple leaves above, scattering soft shadows across the ground. The sound of a swing squeaking in the distance filled the silence. When they sat down, Amira placed her tray on the ground and faced the twins. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from something deeper, reverence maybe. Can you both give me your hands? She asked gently. Eli reached first, curious and calm. Evan hesitated for a moment before doing the same. Amira held their small hands in hers. They were warm, fragile yet strong. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Now, she said softly, close your eyes too. Eli let out a tiny laugh. We can't see anyway, he said playfully. Amira smiled, then just imagine closing them. Callum stood nearby, arms folded, unsure what to make of it. He told himself this was silly, that he was only letting her try to humor his sons, but something about her composure made him stay silent. Amira lowered her head, her voice barely above a whisper. God, she murmured, I don't know how this works, I never really do, but you do. These boys, they've been through so much. Please, if there's even a little light left for them, let it shine. Let them see again, even if it's just once, just enough to remind them what beauty looks like. Her words weren't polished, not poetic, just simple, raw, sincere. The wind seemed to pause, even the laughter in the distance dimmed. Eli's fingers twitched in her hand. A warmth began to spread through his palms, not heat but a quiet pulse like sunlight beneath the skin. Evan felt it too. For the first time in years, he felt something behind his closed eyes, a flicker, faint and fragile but real. Amira's lips trembled as she whispered one last sentence, her voice heavy with tears. It's done, but they'll need to sleep before it happens. Then she let go. Her eyes glistened as she looked up at Callum. It's finished, she said softly. Callum blinked, trying to hold back a chuckle. Finished. Yes, she said firmly, wiping her cheeks. They'll see again, but only after they sleep. He sighed, shaking his head slightly. Amira, I know, she interrupted gently. You don't believe me, it's okay. There was no offense in her tone, only quiet assurance. Eli smiled faintly. Dad, she sounds sure. Callum knelt down to meet his son's level. I know, buddy, but remember what I told you about false hope. Eli nodded, but his smile didn't fade. Yeah, but maybe hope isn't false just because it's small. That silenced Callum. He turned back to Amira, who was already lifting her tray of bracelets again. Thank you for letting me try, she said, bowing her head slightly. Before he could respond, she walked away down the same dusty path, sunlight catching the ends of her braided hair. Callum stood there, motionless, watching her go. He didn't believe in miracles, not anymore, but something about the moment refused to let go of his heart. That night, the Reeves mansion felt unusually quiet. The twins had gone to bed early. Callum stood by their doorway, watching them sleep, their faces soft in the silver light of the moon. He replayed Amira's words over and over. They'll need to sleep before it happens. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but somehow he couldn't. Maybe it was the peace on their faces. Maybe it was the way Eli had squeezed Amira's hand like he actually felt something. He whispered to himself, I wish you were right, little one. Then he turned off the light and went to bed. Sometime after midnight, Eli stirred. His eyelids fluttered, his breathing deepened. A faint hum seemed to fill his ears like the sound of water moving through light. Colors. At first it was faint, blurry patches of gold and blue swirling behind his eyes. He thought he was dreaming. He blinked, and suddenly the blur sharpened the outline of his pillow, the faint glow of the moon. He gasped. Evan, he whispered, shaking his brother's arm. Evan, wake up. Evan groaned. What? Open your eyes. I can't see anything, Evan mumbled. No, Eli said, voice trembling. Try. Evan frowned and did as he said. And then, like a sunrise breaking through darkness, he saw light. Not clear, not perfect, but there it was, the soft glow of their bedside lamp, the faint outline of his brother's face. He blinked rapidly, tears flooding his eyes. Eli, I can see you, he whispered. Eli laughed, a choked, astonished sound. I can see you too. The two boys began to cry and laugh all at once, the room echoing with the sound of disbelief and joy. They stumbled out of bed, touching everything, the chair, the rug, the door. Every object was a miracle. "Dad!" Evan shouted, "Dad!" Callum burst through the door alarmed. "What's wrong?" But when he saw them, their eyes wide open, their faces glowing in the dim light, he froze. Eli pointed, trembling, "Dad, we can see." At first, Callum thought it was another cruel dream. He stepped forward cautiously. "What did you say?" Evan took his father's hand and placed it on his cheek. "We can see you, Dad." Tears filled Callum's eyes before he could stop them. No, that's not possible," he whispered. "It's not." "Look," Eli laughed, spinning clumsily toward the window. "That's the moon, right?" Callum followed his gaze, and for the first time in years, his sons were looking at something. He fell to his knees, pulling them both into his arms. His body shook as tears streamed down his face. "Oh my God," he whispered over and over. "Oh my God." They stayed that way for a long time, three souls wrapped in disbelief, laughter, and tears. The next morning, news broke like wildfire. The Reeves twins, blind since childhood, had miraculously regained their sight overnight. Doctors from every corner of the country rushed to their mansion, desperate to understand what had happened. MRI scans, blood tests, optical exams, all normal. There was no medical explanation. None. Dr. Heller himself flew in from Zurich. After examining them for hours, he said quietly, "Their optic nerves were once dead, now they're alive again. This shouldn't be possible." Callum stood silent, staring out the window, his heart pounding with awe and confusion. He knew exactly where he needed to go. That afternoon, Callum returned to the playground. The children were there again, playing under the same maple tree, but Amira was nowhere to be found. He asked around, but no one seemed to know where she lived. Finally, an old fruit vendor pointed toward a narrow street. "That girl, the one with the bracelets, she stays down there near the old laundromat." Callum followed the directions, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. He found the building, old, with peeling paint and rusted windows. He climbed the narrow staircase and knocked softly on the door. After a moment, it opened. Amira stood there, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Reeves," she whispered. He didn't speak, he just knelt down, tears glistening in his eyes. "They can see, Amira," he said quietly. "Eli and Evan, they can see again." For a second she didn't move, then her lips curved into the softest smile. "I know," she whispered. Callum blinked. "You know." She nodded. "I felt it last night, like light spreading." He shook his head in disbelief. "How did you?" Amira stopped him gently. "Sometimes faith doesn't need answers." Tears slipped down Callum's cheeks. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet pouch and said, "Please take this, it's the least I can do." Amira looked at it, then shook her head. "No, sir, you've already paid me." "Paid you?" he asked, confused. She smiled faintly. "When you believed, even for a second." That night, as Callum watched his sons laughing in the garden, chasing each other under the glow of string lights, he realized something profound. All the billions, all the science, all the power he had ever gathered couldn't buy what that little girl carried inside her: pure, fearless faith. And somewhere in the small, forgotten corner of a playground, a 12-year-old girl had done what the world's greatest doctors could not. She gave his sons their sight, and gave him back his faith. The small neighborhood buzzed with late afternoon life, children chasing each other barefoot down dusty lanes, radios humming from open windows, the scent of frying plantains mixing with the dry air. Callum's car, sleek and dark, looked almost alien, parked between rusted tin roofs and cracked cement walls. He stepped out carefully, his polished shoes crunching gravel as curious eyes followed him. The billionaire who owned half the city didn't belong here, but his heart led him anyway. He clutched a photo of Amira and her mother that one of the vendors had given him earlier. "Down this road," they'd said. "Look for the house with the faded blue door." Callum stopped before a small, leaning building with peeling paint and a crooked number 17 hanging beside the frame. The roof sagged slightly, a curtain of faded pink fabric covered the window. He took a breath and knocked gently. For a moment there was silence, then the door creaked open. A woman in her mid-30s stood there, her face tired yet kind. Her hands were rough from years of labor, probably laundry or market work. Her eyes, though weary, carried a gentleness that felt familiar. "Yes," she asked cautiously, wiping her palms on her apron. "Mrs. Daniels," Callum said softly. She blinked, surprised that a man like him knew her name. "Yes, I am. How may I help you, sir?" "I'm Callum Reeves," he said, removing his hat instinctively, something he hadn't done in years. "I believe you're Amira's mother." Her eyes widened slightly. "Amira," she turned her head and called, "Amira, someone's here for you." From behind the curtain, a small figure peeked out, hesitant, shy. Amira's braids were a little messier than before, her sandals more worn, but her eyes still shone with that same calm light. "Mr. Reeves," she whispered, half in disbelief. Callum's voice trembled as he said, "You gave my sons their world back." Her lips parted, eyes flickering with realization. She stepped out slowly, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of her mother's apron. They can really see?" He nodded, unable to stop the tears rising in his eyes. "They can, perfectly. The doctors, they're speechless, and me, I don't have the words." Mrs. Daniels looked between them, confused. "What's going on, Amira? What is he talking about?" Amira turned to her mother, her voice quiet. "He's the man I told you about, the one with the blind twins." Mrs. Daniels gasped softly. "Oh, child, you didn't trouble the man, did you?" "No," Callum said quickly, stepping forward. "Ma'am, your daughter didn't trouble anyone. She blessed us. She gave my boys something that the world's greatest doctors couldn't give them." Mrs. Daniels frowned, unsure she heard right. "I don't understand." "Neither do I," Callum said honestly, "but I don't need to because my sons can see, and that's enough." A soft silence filled the space between them, thick with disbelief, awe, and gratitude too deep for words. Then Callum, without thinking, went down on one knee right there on the rough concrete. He looked at Amira, tears slipping freely now. "You gave my sons their world back, Amira," he said hoarsely. "I can never repay you for that, but I can try." Amira looked up at her mother, then back at him, her eyes wide and trembling. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "God did, I just asked." Callum smiled faintly through his tears. "Then maybe he sent you." He reached into his coat pocket and brought out a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the Reeves family seal. "Inside this," he said carefully, "is a letter to the head mistress of St. Catherine's Academy. It's one of the best schools in the country. If you'll allow me, I'd like to sponsor your education from now until you graduate." Mrs. Daniels gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Sir, that's too much." "No," Callum interrupted softly, "it's the least I can do." Amira looked at the envelope, then back at him. Her brow furrowed slightly and she shook her head. "Sir," she said in her gentle, honest tone, "thank you, but I don't want to go to a fancy school." Callum blinked, taken aback. "You do?" She shook her head again. "I just want my mom to have a home where it doesn't leak when it rains." Her words hit him like a soft hammer, not with noise but with depth. Mrs. Daniels tried to hush her, embarrassed. "Amira." But Callum raised a hand gently. "No, let her speak." Amira continued quietly, her small fingers twisting the hem of her dress. "I like my school. My teacher says I'm one of her best students. I can still learn there, but my mom, she works too hard. She doesn't sleep when it rains because she's scared the roof will fall. I just want her to rest." For a long moment, Callum couldn't speak. The air between them felt thick, heavy with humility. The girl who had performed a miracle for his sons now asked for nothing more than peace for her mother. He turned toward Mrs. Daniels. "Ma'am, is that true?" Mrs. Daniels looked down, ashamed. "It's an old place, sir. The rain seeps through the roof, but it's home. We manage." Callum's jaw tightened, not in anger but emotion. He stood slowly, wiping his eyes. "Not anymore," he said firmly. "From today, you won't have to manage anything." Mrs. Daniels blinked. "Sir." "I'm getting you a new home," he said simply. "A safe one, somewhere you can sleep without fear, and if you'll let me, I'll still sponsor Amira's education at any school she chooses." Amira's lips parted, stunned. "But why would you do that?" Callum smiled, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and humility. "Because faith like yours deserves more than words, it deserves honor." 2 weeks later, the Daniels family stood before a small, freshly painted house on Maple Grove Avenue, a quiet area just outside the city. The walls gleamed in the sunlight, the roof sturdy and new. A garden patch waited out front with roses already sprouting by the fence. Amira stood frozen, her bracelet tray still hanging around her neck, though she wouldn't need to sell them anymore. Mrs. Daniels covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "This can't be real," she whispered. Callum smiled. "It's as real as you made my son's sight." Amira turned slowly, eyes shining. "You really did all this?" He nodded. "I did, but you inspired it." Before he could say more, Amira ran forward and wrapped her arms around him. It was a small, tight hug, but it carried more emotion than any award or speech he'd ever received. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," he said softly, returning the hug. "Thank you, Amira." Mrs. Daniels joined them, shaking her head in disbelief. "Sir, I don't know how to repay you." "You already have," Callum said kindly, "by raising her." Later that evening, after everything was settled, Callum drove Amira and her mother to the Reeves mansion. He wanted them to meet Eli and Evan again now that their eyes could see the girl who had changed everything. The twins waited anxiously at the entrance, dressed neatly, their eyes full of joy and curiosity. When Amira stepped out of the car, they froze, then ran to her. "Amira," Eli shouted, nearly tripping in his excitement. Evan laughed, his eyes glistening. "We can see you now." Amira laughed too, tears sparkling. "And I can see you smiling." The three of them hugged tightly, an innocent reunion of souls bound by a miracle. Callum watched from the side, his throat tight. For a man who had spent his life chasing power and perfection, this, a child's faith, a mother's love, a family's laughter, was the purest thing he'd ever witnessed. He turned to Mrs. Daniels. "Would you like to see the garden? The boys love it." She smiled softly. "Yes, I'd like that." As they walked through the garden, the sound of the children's laughter carried behind them. Callum glanced at the flowers and said quietly, "You know, before this happened, I didn't believe in miracles." Mrs. Daniels nodded slowly. "Most people don't until one finds them." He chuckled softly. "Your daughter didn't just heal my sons, she healed me too." Mrs. Daniels looked at him, her eyes gentle. "Maybe that's what miracles really do, they heal what eyes can't see." That night, after dropping them off at their new home, Callum sat alone in his study. On his desk lay a photograph, Eli, Evan, and Amira standing beneath the maple tree, all smiling. The sunlight caught Amira's braids just right, like strands of gold. He picked up the photo, tracing it with his fingers. "Faith," he murmured, "so small yet so powerful." He looked out the window toward the sky where stars scattered like silver dust. Somewhere, he believed, there was a divine smile watching them all. Months passed. Amira started her new school, still humble, still kind. She'd visit the Reeves mansion every weekend, tutoring the twins in math and sometimes joining them in piano lessons. The three became inseparable. And every time Callum saw her, he was reminded of something he'd once lost and finally found again, the quiet strength of believing in what eyes cannot see. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in amber and rose, Callum stood in the garden watching the kids chase butterflies. Eli ran ahead, Evan close behind, and Amira laughed as she tried to catch up. Mrs. Daniels stood beside him, smiling softly. "You've given her a life I never could." Callum shook his head. "No, ma'am, she gave us one first." That night, as he tucked his sons into bed, Eli asked, "Dad, do you think Amira was an angel?" Callum paused, smiling thoughtfully. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe angels just look like ordinary people until they do something extraordinary." Evan yawned, whispering, "Like her." "Exactly," Callum said, turning off the lamp, "like her." And as the boys drifted to sleep, the faint sound of laughter echoed from the garden outside, a sound that, to Callum Reeves, would forever mean one thing. Faith had finally come home. Time passed quietly, like sunlight moving across a window pane. What began as a miracle in a small playground grew into a story whispered across cities, a story that doctors couldn't explain, reporters couldn't forget, and one man could never stop believing in. For Callum Reeves, life had changed in ways even money couldn't measure. His sons could see again, his faith had returned, and his world, once made of glass and logic, now had color, laughter, and grace. But the real miracle, he would always say, wasn't in the healing. It was in the girl who carried light where others carried fear. The Reeves mansion had changed too. The garden had grown wider, filled with blooms Amira once planted during her weekend visits. A new greenhouse stood in the corner, filled with the twins' art projects and plants named after people they loved. Callum walked through the garden that morning, his hair now touched with silver, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He was reading an invitation printed on crisp parchment with golden edges. St. Catherine's Academy requests your presence at the graduation ceremony of Miss Amira Daniels, valedictorian, class of 2032. He smiled proudly, his eyes misting over. Amira had done it. Not only had she excelled in her studies, but she'd also earned a national scholarship for medicine, a field she had chosen with one dream in mind: to help children see again. He looked toward the house where Eli and Evan, now 19, were preparing to leave for the ceremony. Their laughter echoed down the hallway the same way it had when they were 12. Only now they were tall, confident young men with bright, unclouded eyes. When they reached him, Evan grinned. "Dad, you ready?" Callum nodded. "I've been ready for this day since the first time she held your hands." Eli smiled softly. "She changed everything." Callum chuckled. "Yes, she did." The auditorium was packed, proud parents, cheering classmates, teachers with tears in their eyes. Amira stood on stage in a crisp blue gown, her braids now longer, her smile brighter. The gold medal around her neck shimmered beneath the stage lights. Mrs. Daniels sat beside Callum, holding a handkerchief to her eyes. "I still can't believe this is my daughter," she whispered. Callum smiled. "Believe it, ma'am, she's not just your daughter, she's a light for all of us." When Amira stepped up to the microphone, the entire hall went silent. Her voice, still gentle but stronger now, carried through the air. 7 years ago, I was a girl selling bracelets under a maple tree. I didn't have much, only faith and a dream that somehow the world could be kind again. Then I met a family who taught me that miracles don't end when they happen, they begin there. Because miracles aren't just about what changes in front of your eyes, they're about what changes inside your heart. Callum felt his chest tighten. The twins reached over, each gripping one of his hands. "To Mr. Reeves and my 2 favorite brothers, Eli and Evan," Amira continued, her eyes shining, "thank you for believing even when it didn't make sense. You showed me that faith isn't about seeing first, it's about loving first. And to my mother, who prayed for me long before I knew how to pray for others, this is for you." The audience erupted into applause, even the principal wiped her eyes. Callum rose to his feet, clapping harder than anyone else. Pride flooded through him, not the kind that boasts, but the kind that bows its head in gratitude. After the ceremony, the Reeves family waited outside the hall. When Amira stepped out, diploma in hand, Eli and Evan ran to her at once. "Valedictorian," Evan laughed, spinning her around. Eli grinned. "We knew you'd do it." She laughed through her tears. "You two haven't changed a bit." Callum stepped forward, holding out a bouquet of white lilies. "You've made us all proud, Amira." She took the flowers, her smile trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves." He shook his head. "Call me Callum, I think you've earned that by now." Amira laughed softly. "All right, Callum." They all shared a quiet moment, not of grandeur but of shared history, of invisible strings that had tied their hearts together since that day under the maple tree. Amira and her mother moved into a small house closer to the city. It wasn't lavish, but it was beautiful, filled with light, books, and the laughter of people who had known pain and overcome it. Every weekend, she still visited the Reeves mansion. She'd have tea with Callum in the garden and help the twins with their charity project, the Sight Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to funding eye surgeries for underprivileged children. It was her idea. One sunny afternoon, as they sat beneath the same maple tree that had witnessed the beginning of it all, Amira placed a small wooden bracelet on Callum's wrist. It was simple, hand-carved, with the words "Light lives here" engraved inside. Callum looked at it, touched. "You still make these?" "Always," she said. "They remind me where I started." He nodded, smiling. "And remind me where I found my faith." The world came to know her name. At just 21, Dr. Amira Daniels became one of the youngest researchers in neuro-ophthalmology, working with the Reeves Foundation to develop new treatments for childhood blindness. In every interview, when journalists asked how she began, she always told the same story. It started with a prayer in a playground. A prayer that wasn't mine alone, it belonged to every child who ever hoped for light again. Photos of her shaking hands with world leaders filled magazines, but when asked who she admired most, she'd smile and say, "A father and his two sons, because they taught me that miracles are meant to be shared." The Reeves mansion was quiet again, the kind of quiet that holds peace, not loneliness. Rain tapped softly against the windows as Callum sat in his study, the bracelet Amira gave him still on his wrist. Eli and Evan were in college now, studying music and architecture, respectively. Mrs. Daniels often visited with Amira, who was preparing for her next medical conference in Geneva. As thunder rumbled gently outside, Callum heard a knock on the door. He turned, and there she was. Amira, now a grown woman but with the same warm eyes. "Busy as always," she teased, stepping in. He smiled. "Never too busy for you, doctor." She laughed, setting down a file on his desk. "The Foundation's next project, we're building a children's eye center in Lagos. I thought you'd like to see the designs." He flipped through the pages slowly, his eyes softening. "You're changing the world, Amira." She shook her head gently. "No, I'm just continuing what you started." He looked up, studying her face so full of purpose and grace. "No," he said quietly, "what you started." That night, as they stepped out into the rain, Amira lifted her face to the sky. Raindrops glistened in her hair like tiny pearls. "Remember what I said years ago?" she asked softly. Callum smiled. "About your mother's roof leaking when it rained." She nodded. "Now every time it rains, I think of her, safe, warm, smiling. It reminds me that faith really did build us a new roof." Callum chuckled gently, emotion catching in his throat. "You know, Eli once asked me if I thought you were an angel." Amira tilted her head. "And what did you say?" He met her gaze. "I told him I didn't know, but now, looking at what your life has become," he paused, his eyes glistening, "I think maybe he was right." She smiled softly. "I'm no angel, Mr. Reeves, just someone who believed." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's all an angel really is." The world had changed again. The Amira Daniels Children's Eye Center stood proudly in 3 countries, each one with a small plaque by the entrance that read, "Dedicated to all who choose faith over fear." Eli became a celebrated composer. His music, inspired by the sounds he once imagined in darkness, filled concert halls with emotion and light. Evan designed hospitals, including the one Amira now worked in. And Callum, older now, slower but content, spent most of his days mentoring young philanthropists, telling them one story above all others. "If you ever doubt that miracles exist," he'd say, "just remember the girl who gave my sons their sight. Her name was Amira Daniels, and her light never faded." One bright afternoon, Amira returned to the old playground, the one where everything began. The maple tree was still there, though taller now, its leaves rustling softly in the wind. Children ran around, laughter echoing in the distance. She sat on the same blue bench and looked up at the sky. In her hand was a new bracelet she'd just made, a simple, wooden, and unpolished. On it, she carved 2 small letters. E and E. For Eli and Evan. She smiled, tears brimming, then slipped the bracelet onto a little boy passing by, a stranger, just as Callum once had been to her. "Here," she said kindly, "for good luck." The boy smiled, confused but happy. "Thank you, miss." As he ran off, Amira leaned back on the bench, watching the sunlight scatter through the branches, golden, alive, eternal. Somewhere far away, she could almost hear the laughter of 2 boys, the voice of a man who had once doubted, and the whisper of a God who never forgets. And in that quiet moment, beneath the same maple tree, she knew one truth that would stay with her forever. Miracles don't fade, they multiply every time someone chooses to believe.